The top story we're focusing at 11 a.m. just a week before Prime Minister Narendra Modi's trip to Sri Lanka. Lankan Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe has justified actions against the Indian fishermen. In an interview to a TV channel, Wickremesinghe said that Lankan Navy follows the law of land when it fires at Indian fishermen entering Lankan waters. He clearly ruled it out as a violation of human rights. Lankan Prime Minister said that Indian fishermen should stay away from Lankan waters to avoid being shot at. Ironically, the statement has come even as fishermen from both sides are engaged in talks. Meanwhile, India will raise Lankan Prime Minister's remarks on Indian fishermen with the Lankan President Maithripala Sirisena. External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj will raise the issue of safety of Indian fishermen in view of Lankan Prime Minister's statement. Sushma is in Sri Lanka ahead of Prime Minister Modi visit to Sri Lanka next week. MEA sources tell headlines today that India has always expected a humanitarian view from Sri Lanka on this issue as it deals with the lives and livelihood of hundreds of poor fishermen. Joining me live on this issue is the headlines today's Maha Siddiqui, who joins us live from the national capital. Also to give his perspective is editor South TS Sudhir joining us live from Hyderabad. Maha, coming to you first, we just heard what MEA spokesperson Syed Akbaruddin had to say. He says that hundreds of poor fishermen's lives depends on fishing, and if they accidentally do come into the waters of Sri Lanka, it is not justified to shoot them. And Sushma Swaraj, who is in Colombo, will raise this issue with her counterpart today.
Well, absolutely. She is going to be raising this issue with her counterpart in Sri Lanka. And as you just heard, the MEA spokesperson, Syed Akbaruddin, also saying that when she calls on the Prime Minister, perhaps this issue could come up. But remember, all this is happening just ahead of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Sri Lanka. So it does appear that ahead of that visit, this will be a matter that will find focus in the agenda of the two countries. Also, let me point out, Amita, that the Sri Lankan, the Sri Lanka is going to go in for parliamentary elections, and perhaps these statements are also largely part of public consumption over there ahead of the elections, which are slated for mid this year. But that apart, the fact that the Sri Lankan Prime Minister has said that for them, even shooting at Indian fishermen is not a no, because they feel that they are trespassing into their waters and therefore they are in their right to shoot at them, is a matter of huge concern for India, because these are poor fishermen who we are talking about, who continue to say that they inadvertently, accidentally drift into the Sri Lankan waters. Now that's the argument that the Indian side gives. Even as the two fishermen's associations of both the sides are engaged in talks, they'll have one round of talks just before Prime Minister Narendra Modi goes to Sri Lanka also. But the fact that the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka himself endorses the fact that the Navy is in its right to shoot at these people does come as a matter of huge concern to India, and India would want this to be addressed at the highest levels in Sri Lanka.
Right. Sudhir, how do you think it's going to impact the ties between India and Sri Lanka? It was Ranil Wickremesinghe took a very strong stand saying that it's no human rights violation if the Indian fishermen who accidentally or inadvertently venture into Lankan waters, it's nothing wrong to shoot them.
Well, obviously the kind of language that has been used by Ranil Wickremesinghe in that interview obviously does not sound very good, does not sound good, especially in the context of the fact that Sushma Swaraj is in Colombo at the moment and Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be in Sri Lanka next week. But taking off from the point that Maha Siddiqui made, that yes, the parliamentary elections are slated mid this year in Sri Lanka, and obviously Wickremesinghe is kind of talking to a local constituency there in Sri Lanka. But apart from that, also the promise that Maithripala Sirisena had made pre-elections, that he will abolish executive presidency within 100 days of coming to power. 55 days are already over, and obviously Wickremesinghe wants to tell the people of Sri Lanka and also the SAARC neighborhood that he's the one who is going to call the shots, that he's really the boss of the government in Sri Lanka. So in that sense, that kind of some kind of a jostling for power position also taking place within the Sri Lankan political establishment in Sri Lanka, and obviously that's something which the Ministry of External Affairs as well as the Prime Minister's office will have to be conscious of when it actually takes up this issue with Sri Lanka in Colombo, when Sushma Swaraj will actually talk to both the President and the Prime Minister about this today.
Sudhir, only last month, the President of Sri Lanka, Maithripala Sirisena, on his first foreign visit, he visited India. We saw amicable talks between Narendra Modi and Maithripala Sirisena. What went wrong? I mean, it's kind of a very harsh statement coming directly from the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka. He's saying that there's nothing wrong at shooting at Indian fishermen who venture in Lankan waters.
It's too early to say, Amitabh, what went wrong, but essentially what Wickremesinghe is doing is to kind of pander to his local constituency, and also within that opposition alliance which actually came to power in January this year, that Wickremesinghe is the person who is going to call the shots. He was seen as the brain behind Sirisena's successful presidential campaign, and obviously now that the prime ministerial elections are also due in mid this year, obviously Wickremesinghe wants to be seen as a person who is a tough negotiator, as someone who will actually take up Sri Lanka's position vis-a-vis the SAARC neighborhood. So that's the kind of positioning that Ranil Wickremesinghe is doing very cleverly. He was seen in the mid-90s and also in the early part of the century as someone who is a friend of India, as someone who is a soft leader. Perhaps some kind of an image building, some kind of a brand equity that Wickremesinghe wants to change within Sri Lanka's political establishment, and these comments should also be seen in that context. But yes, in the context of India-Sri Lanka relations, definitely they put a bit of a spanner in the works, and obviously the Ministry of External Affairs as well as the Indian Prime Minister's office will have to do some deft maneuvering as far as this positioning of the Sri Lankan Prime Minister is concerned.
Maha, the Indian fishermen and the Sri Lankan fishermen venturing in Indian waters and vice versa has been a very sensitive issue between the two countries, and it's going to be discussed, as you said, between the External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj and her counterpart. But how do you think it's going to impact the talks? Because it's a very harsh and a very strong statement that is coming from the Prime Minister, the Lankan Prime Minister.
Well, Amita, as you were mentioning, the Sri Lankan president himself came to India some time back. It was his first port of call after assuming office, and as a reciprocal gesture, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is going to be going to Sri Lanka next week. On the 13th, he'll be there in Sri Lanka. Now, this definitely does show that there is a difference. There is a change after Mahinda Rajapakse was defeated in the presidential elections. He was seen as being close to China. This regime is perhaps showing that they want to be close to India. But definitely an issue, something like that of fishermen, which is more of an emotive issue, something that has ramifications on the humanitarian aspect as well, is something that can be very tricky, as Sudhir was putting it there. It will really be a test of the diplomacy on part of India as to how they actually are able to resolve this issue in a manner which seems appropriate for the Indian fishermen. While Sri Lanka continues to say that it is the fishermen in Jaffna who are suffering, who are also Tamils, remember. So it is a very difficult issue for the Indian side as well to tackle, when the fishermen on the Indian side continue to say that they do not do it on purpose. They do not go into the Sri Lankan waters on purpose, but they drift into Sri Lankan waters inadvertently. The Sri Lankan side continues to hold on to the argument that there is better catch on their side, and that the Indian fishermen venture into the water, the Sri Lankan waters, knowingly. So all these matters need to be resolved. We are talking about really poor fishermen over here on both the sides, not just on the Indian side, and that is the matter that really needs to be resolved in a very deft fashion. Also, let me quickly point out over here,
interrupt you over here. We're getting the phone of senior journalist N. Ram, who's joining us on the broadcast. Many thanks for speaking to Headlines today, sir. Your first reaction to the very strong statement that's coming in from the Lankan Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, who says that there is no problem in shooting at Indian fishermen who venture in Lankan waters.
I think they're not going to do it. I know Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe very well. He's been friendly to India in and out of office, and he's just asserting a position. I've not heard this thing about shooting, but certainly it's not going to happen. But there's no question. I think I just heard a comment. I agree with that, livelihood is involved for both sides. Poor fishermen are involved, especially Tamil fishermen in Sri Lanka. You're not even talking, you're really talking about Tamil fishermen also, and especially on the other side. And clearly India is in the wrong, because it is not an inadvertent crossing over. There are GPS systems and so on, and everybody knows that the fishing resources on our side have been exhausted or nearly exhausted. and the trawlers across poach into Sri Lankan waters and poach on Sri Lankan fishing resources, creating real problems for poor fishermen who are on the other side. And this issue has gone on too long, and our authorities, both at the central and state level, have done far too little to restrain, to resolve this problem by restraining our fishermen, and especially those on trawlers, to do what is clearly indefensible. Having said that, I think harsh measures should be avoided. Certainly, shooting is bad. Would be bad. That is not acceptable. But if they try to stop it, I think you can only do it by through the two governments. And so far, our government has handled this soberly, and I'm sure Sushma Swaraj as well as Prime Minister Modi will see the rights and wrongs of this issue, and we must find a solution, not through chauvinism, not through big brotherly posturing, saying that how dare a small country take up this issue. And the international law is clearly on Sri Lanka's side in this issue, but we need to resolve this on a friendly basis.
But sir, how do you think it's justified? I mean, you have the Lankan Prime Minister himself who is saying on a TV channel that if a thief comes into my house, I have every right to shoot him, and the laws will stand at my side. I have done nothing wrong in it, and it doesn't amount to human right violation. I mean, we do hear of fishermen being arrested by the Lankan Navy often, but shooting at the fishermen is something. Do you think that the Lankan Prime Minister has taken it too far this time?
As I said, I have not heard this, and I need to verify this report. I have not heard it. You may have, so let's look at it. So certainly, shooting is not the answer. And if Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe said that, I would be very surprised. But certainly, it's not going to happen. It won't be allowed to happen because that's totally. It'll be outrageous if that happens. But if they apprehend your fishermen, that's another matter. So, but I think. Since I have not heard it, I cannot really react unless I verify this statement and its authenticity and also the context. But I'll be very surprised, as I said, because I've not heard, you've got to check it out. But the issue is here not shooting, which should be avoided. The issue is, what do you do? What is the solution? How is the solution to be found to this issue? We have to restrain our fishermen from doing the wrong thing and doing it deliberately on trawlers, using trawlers. And the other side has to perhaps go out of its way to be patient and resolve this issue through talks, government-to-government talks, which will work.
But Mr. Enram, do you think that the Indian government stand has been too soft and in not resolving the issue? It's been a very sensitive issue between both countries.
No, the Indian government, I think both the previous government and this government have, in my understanding, done their best. There have been numerous meetings with the previous Sri Lankan government, the Mahinda Rajapaksa government and the Manmohan Singh government. It's been addressed at the top levels as well. It's found its place in various official statements. And this government, as I said, has been very sober, I think, in dealing with Sri Lanka, trying to improve relations on across the board, and also on this issue. So I don't think governments can be faulted, but where they should do more is to do things I wouldn't say on the ground, on sea. You've got to educate our fishermen and restrain them from doing the wrong thing.